Yes. And furniture.
All right, everyone, good evening. We're approaching 7 o'clock. So I would like to call the Tuesday, October 25th, 2016 Gardner Planning Commission meeting to order. If everyone will please rise and state the Pledge of Allegiance with me. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Move into roll call, starting on my right.
Roberts here.
Limer here.
Mater here.
Freeman here.
Lavella here.
Brady here.
Quorum is present. Moving into the consent agenda. All matters listed within the consent agenda have been distributed to each member of the Planning Commission for study. These items are considered to be routine and will be enacted upon by one motion with no separate discussion. If separate discussion is desired on an item from either the Planning Commission or from the floor, that item may be removed from the consent agenda and placed on the regular agenda. Is there any item any member of the commission would like to have removed from the agenda? Consent agenda, I should say. Any item any member of the public would like to have removed from the consent agenda? Seeing none, I would entertain a motion to approve the consent agenda.
So moved.
Second.
We have a motion made by Limer with a second by Lavella that we approve the consent agenda. All those in favor, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. All those opposed? Motion passes with all in favor. Moving on to the regular agenda. Item number 1. CVS Pharmacy Final Plat, FP-16-04. Consider a final plat for CVS for a 1.4-acre single-lot subdivision located at the northwest corner of West Main and North Center Streets. Do we have a presentation from staff this evening?
Yes, we do.
Great.
Good evening, Madam Chair, Commissioners. Chad Barr, Planner 1, to present this particular agenda item, Item 1. As you stated, it's a request for a final plat for CVS for 1.4 acres located at the northwest corner of West Main Street and North Center Street here in Gardner. This particular slide is showing the actual final plat as it's been submitted. I'll just kind of go around from the top and kind of go around in a clockwise fashion to explain some of the features of it. The red-colored triangular area up in that northwest corner, that's road right-of-way that would be dedicated, that would add to West Shawnee Street. West Shawnee Street, as it heads to the west in this part of town, there's slight of an undulation or a little bit of a curve. So to take to make sure that the city's road right-of-way width standards are met there, a little bit of right-of-way has to be dedicated for that. Then you'll notice all the way around the perimeter of the plat, designated with the purple line, is a 10 feet wide utility easement, which would house many of the utilities, particularly on coming from the west into the property and then up the jog and then it would go up just short or south of the right-of-way dedication and then on to the east. The third item here is the 34 feet wide sanitary sewer easement. The sanitary sewer is proposed to go actually underneath the proposed retail pharmacy use. And this sanitary sewer easement would be wide enough to accommodate the slope of that particular line. So the 34 feet is the width there, and that's seen with that kind of gray coloring there. Going down to the southwest corner of the subject property is a proposed ingress and egress easement that's designated with the yellow or the gold color. This would also serve as the principal Main Street entrance for the pharmacy use. It also shows it going to the west. That would be for anticipated future access to maybe something developed in the future. So they're trying to do some planning ahead of time with that. Being vacated with this particular plat is the alley, which is actually underneath the sanitary sewer easement on this particular slide. And there's also a driveway easement down kind of in the southeast corner. You can't really see it very well on here, but that would also be vacated via the recording of this particular plat. There are a couple other easements, but they were recorded separately from the old Town of Gardner original plat, which this is being consolidated, if approved, would create just basically one property or one lot. So there's a couple other items that would be vacated under separate instrument. And so a lot of these things here I've already talked about. But obviously what would happen with the Old Town Gardner original plat from going back to July of 1866, those would be incorporated into one parcel. And then the individual modern-day property lines, if you will, of 102 and 116 West Main Street, 113 West Sherman Street, and then 112 and 116 North Center Street, those would be consolidated into one property as well. And no excise tax is due per Section 4.06D2 of the Land Development Code due to the decrease in density. Currently, there's 11 dwelling units there. Those would all be eliminated. So we see that as a definite decrease in density, and therefore the excise tax is not triggered. So having said that, staff recommends approval subject to the following two conditions. Number one, construction plans for all utilities, infrastructure, and public facilities shall be submitted to and approved by the city prior to the city signing the final plat. And number two, before a building permit will be issued, the final plat shall be recorded and a copy of such recording shall be supplied to the city. And actually, I think a lot of those public improvement plans have already been submitted after we've kind of created this or whatever, and the city's in the process of looking those over. So, unless you'd have any specific questions, that would conclude the presentation.
Going back to your second slide, I believe it's that
one?
red triangular section. On there on Shawnee, that's obviously there's an easement that's going to be, that we own, if you will, but this is going to be cutting into some properties of homeowners once the work is completed.
Well, Commissioner Brady, I know that kind of related to this this red triangular piece, there's been discussion that's kind of been back and forth by the city as a kind of a traffic calming device for the middle of West Shawnee Street. I was talking to the city engineer today, trying to anticipate that question, and it's still kind of divided whether it'll be a speed bump or if it'll be a median in the middle of that road. There was some concern with the median that there could be some problems or issues with people that exist on the road now that live there with being able to maneuver around the median and get into their driveways and such. So I think it's still open that the median could still turn into like a speed bump. There's, I think on the final development plan, there will be signage discouraging through traffic, you know, to the west of this particular subject property down West Shawnee
This is all
Street.
before the homes that must be further to the west? Okay. So we still haven't really worked out what that's going to look like?
No, upon talking with the city engineer just this morning or whatever, that's still in flux, from my understanding.
I've driven down, I don't live too far from here. Is that street more narrow than our newer streets in the city? It just feels narrow to me.
Yeah, I know what you mean.
Yeah.
It does feel kind of narrow.
And the trees, you know, in that area too compared to the rest of town. But
I can't answer that definitively without looking at some further. I might be able to do that, you know, once I leave this area here or whatever.
yeah, I guess that now's a good time if we have applicant or related applicant.
Pardon me?
I was just going to say usually after staff presentation, if there's applicant or applicant-related findings or additional information that would be good for the commission, usually now is a time I would open that up for those comments.
Okay.
You're more than welcome to approach the podium, state your name and address for the public record,
Okay.
and be heard.
John Young, 12150 Northwest 81st Street, Parkville, Missouri. J&J survey, and we prepared the plat here for the property. And in your question on the right-of-way there, the properties to the west along Shawnee, the right-of-way jogs about 20 feet to the south, and that's why we're getting a little triangle, so the street kinda goes,
Right, I've seen that, I know what you're
zigs
talking
through there, so that right-of-way won't affect any of the properties to the west at all.
But my question dealt with the width of the street.
I'm not certain what the pavement width is. The right-of-way width is 58 adjoining our property and 60 to the west on the north side.
Chad, help review, it's been a while since we've looked at CVS stuff. The drive-through portion of the pharmacy is located where?
Commissioner Brady, the drive-through portion would be on the northeast part of the building. Let's see if I can get put in, let me go to the next slide. So if you can follow does the cursor show up for you guys? See, I'm moving the cursor.
No.
No. Okay, let me go over, how about?
There it is.
There we go.
The top right-hand corner.
Yeah, the drive-through would be about in this area through here. Be on the northeast corner of the building. So there would be entrance, off of West Main Street, and then they could come in front of the building, and there would be, circular traffic along the east side, and then there's the drive-through, and then people would, go around on the north side of the building, and then they could either exit, to the north, and go either east or west, preferably east, or they could go along the west side of the building, and then they would have to exit to the west onto Main Street. They wouldn't be able to turn, left there, so.
Under your staff comments, you said something about, construction plans for any utilities. Any plans for additional lighting on it'll be the west side of Center Street? Just, once again, it just seems so dark over there. There are some light poles on, on the west side, but on the east side, there is not. I just know, when I'm in that area, I see a lot of pedestrians, a lot of bikes, and not a lot of light.
I do know, Commissioner Brady, remember from the final development plan that CVS was going to do like their interior lighting for the parking areas.
Right.
And that was kind of throughout the entire property, where there would be drive areas, and in particular where the parking would be, which would be in front of the store, along the south of the property, and then along the east property line. So they were going to have various light poles there for lighting.
But actual street side lighting, that's the city's responsibility, not the developers. Poles and whatnot.
There isn't a light pole?
No, there's, I think there's a couple lights right here,
Okay, but not on.
there's just not a lot of illumination at all. There's nothing on this side.
I think to, echo what Commissioner Freeman stated, the developer has provided, the lighting to standard as requested. I think anything additional definitely would be the city's responsibility, and good concern without a doubt, but I don't think there's anything from commission perspective that we can do, except it's noted for the record, so that is good. Thank you. We have other questions. We do have the surveyor with us, and of course we have staff, so any questions or comments before we entertain a motion on this item?
I move that we approve final plat case number FP-16-04 for CVS, consisting of one lot with the following conditions, and forward a recommendation to the governing body for acceptance of right-of-way dedication and easements. Item 1, construction plans for all utilities, infrastructure, or public facilities shall be submitted to and approved by the city prior to the city signing the final plat. Item 2, before a building permit will be issued, the final plat shall be recorded, and a copy of such recording shall be supplied to the city.
Second.
We have a motion made by Freeman with a second by Weimer that we approve the final plat for FP-16-04 for CVS, consisting of one lot with the following conditions, and forward the recommendation to the governing body for acceptance of right-of-way dedication easements. Item number 1, construction plans for all utilities, infrastructure, or public facilities shall be submitted to and approved by the city prior to the city signing the final plat. Number 2, before a building permit will be issued, the final plat shall be recorded, and a copy of such recording shall be supplied to the city. All those in favor, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. All those opposed?
No.
Motion carries with 5 in favor and 1 nay. Thank you. Moving on to item number 2 of the regular agenda. Land Development Code text amendments. Consider initiation of text amendments to the Land Development Code. Do we have a presentation this evening from staff tonight?
Oh, yes, we do.
Great, thank you.
Good evening, Commissioners. This is Kelly Woodward, Chief Planner for, back to you for regulations. So we're coming to you with a recommendation to direct staff to initiate some code amendments as summarized in your staff report. We adopted the Land Development Code on June 20th, 2016, which provided an opportunity to implement the vision of the comprehensive plan and other city plans. And since that effective date, which was August 1st, staff has been able to observe the code in action and evaluate the effectiveness for different kinds of development. Real case studies, you learn a lot from those. So we did work pretty hard to introduce the code to some new developers who have really given some positive impressions about the code, and also to ease the transitions with our existing development community, who were probably had mixed impressions at first, but I think are coming along and accepting of the changes. As with all new codes, pretty much every single time, you find that you want to make some small changes later to make the code more practical or clear, which is what we're attempting to suggest that you do. So Kansas statutes state that these amendments have to be initiated either by the governing body or the planning commission. If you initiate, potential amendments tonight, the next step would be for staff to gather some more information, come to you with some recommended language, and then you would hold a public hearing on the proposed amendments at a future date. So we were thinking possibly November for some of them. Some of them may take longer, so that might be more like December. And then, even if you initiate potential amendments, you may end up not amending anything or specific things later, which is okay. So we're recommending that you initiate all the potential amendments that we've pointed out in the staff report, and that I'm going to present to you one by one, understanding that you may or may not recommend these amendments for approval at a later date. If upon consensus, you decide this evening that there's, one or two or whatever that you don't want to initiate, you can do that too. So keep in mind, when we discuss these recommendations, I'm not going to try to get too down in the weeds and too much into detail. I'm mostly going to talk to you about what are the issues that's prompting this request. And if you do want to talk further detail, we can do that too. But I was thinking we'd discuss them one by one, get feedback one by one, so they don't get confused.
Sounds good. Do we, I guess, Kelly, maybe before we start, I don't know if we have anyone in the audience who might want to make a comment or two based on the proposed changes. And if so, we could allow a couple minutes of time. If there is anyone who would like to speak on some of the amendments, please come forward, state your name and address for the public record. And we would be happy to hear them.
Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity to speak. My name is Phil Martins, Martins Family Enterprises. We're home builders in the area, and we've basically, in the past few years, have taken over some of the areas that were left in demise with the economy and the real estate downfall. We've taken over Madison Reserve, finished it out, completed it, and then now we're into Copper Springs, which is north of 167th and Moonlight, which was a disaster when we started there, and looking forward to, and it's going well there. my basis of tonight is basically to make it to where what happens in Gardner is uniformly in most other cities. It makes it a lot easier. The problem with one of the 705, I guess we'll start with the 704 rule. The biggest problem with that is that it requires a 9-foot side building setback. The problem with that is most of everybody else, and you'll have the list of cities, everybody else is 7 foot. And that doesn't sound like a lot, but it is a lot because it takes away our most popular plans that we build in Olathe, Overland Park, anywhere else, and allows us to build a 3-car over there, but I can't build a 3-car garage in Gardner because on certain plans. So we have to reconstruct and use less plans to build in Gardner than we do in other municipalities locally. So that would be a big help on a 70-foot lot, that it goes 7 foot, which is 10 foot, or 10% on each side, which is not anything out of line compared to any other municipality. And we could use all our plans in all our areas and basically use our best selling plans in Gardner. And the problem is everybody likes to have that 3-car garage if they can do it or they can afford it. And that kind of takes us into the driveway situation, which would be the next item that I'd like to discuss real quick, is 7.05. This has been kind of confusing in Gardner. Basically, in March, if you came and bought one of our houses, we could only go 18 foot on the driveway width. And we're talking at the right of way. And then in about before, I think it was May or June, that we were able to go basically a full 3-car length out, which could be clear up to 30 feet. Now, I'm not asking for that. It doesn't have to be that, but I've got one buyer that I couldn't do it because, the ruling was we couldn't, then it was. Now we've changed this new way into, we're down to basically a 17.5-foot driveway maximum. Well, if everybody knows that, well, not everybody, 20 feet you need in the garage. You need 16 foot for garage door. When you have 2 vehicles in, most everybody's either got to park at an angle or whatever just to get the heck out of the car on the outsides. So that's where the problem is. And think of that as the driveway outside. You got 2 cars. You're basically going to have to open the door, get out, and have 8 inches in between, more than, the driveway, to get in, to open your door, to get out, to not have to go in the grass or the snow or whatever the time may be. But the reason I'm here tonight is because the 22-foot one is what they're recommending would help immensely. And we're not looking clear for the 30-foot one that would be a 3-car garage length all the way out. Because normally what you do is you'll swoop the driveway in, it'll start out here, and then it'll swoop out to the 3rd-car garage. So that would help a lot. The problem with the other one is, like I say, you have 8 inches to get out of your car to either be in the grass on either side if you have 2 cars parked in here. So that's the issue on that one, which the recommendation that they have is will work with the 22-foot width. The last one is basically that something might be able to, even delete, if you could, as the 7.03 is materials color. First of all, I don't know where the city needs to be involved with house colors and house paint colors. First of all, in a new home, if the builder's going to pick it. If it's not sold, the homeowner's going to pick it if it is sold. But the HOA normally has an architectural control committee on it to where you're not going to see the oranges, purples, red, white, and blue houses painted. We don't want them either. So there is some kind of control on that because, we're trying to sell the home. So, you got to stay within the realm of the palette already. But the way it's required right now, we have to turn in a palette just to get a building permit. Well, when we first turn in a building permit, we don't have any clue what the color of that house is going to be, let alone we start building here, and the guy at the next is gonna paint it brown, and you got brown or beige or whatever you're gonna do. So it could change. They've been nice enough to help us, and everybody on the staff has been real helpful, and Michelle too. And, all three of them actually have been really helpful. But if we could actually even eliminate that one, it's best left up to the homeowner, the builder, and let alone the HOAs, or usually the police dogs of the paint colors. I mean, especially on repaints, but what the city doesn't really need to be involved. They really don't have anybody to go out and check paint colors. I mean, if you're asking an inspector to do that, you can do that, but I don't think that's on his first on the list. That might be on the last, but the palette colors will change quite a bit from start to finish. But like I say, since they've been allowing us to do it later on and they're requiring it the CEO, I'd like to go one step further and just delete it all, because I don't see too many houses that you're trying to sell in a subdivision that are going to be something that's going to, other people are going to object to hurt sales. That'd be kind of silly for anybody to do. But that's the three items I had, so
Great.
if there's any questions, I could answer them, or...
I don't think at the moment.
Okay, thank you.
Appreciate your input. Thank you. Great. So Kelly, what would be your recommendation? Should we, since this is just the initiation, right? This is just discussion,
Mm-hmm.
of potential initiation. Should we walk through each one? I assume you said you had each
Yep.
one kind of portioned out. Do you want to take comments as we go through each one, or do you want to wait till the end?
I think we need to do them one by one, or it's gonna,
I
Coming
would
back to
agree,
it.
but I'm asking staff for their
I think that's a
That's
great,
how they would like to do it.
let's ask
This
how
is
we'd like to
fun,
do it.
and everybody
Instead.
today is nice.
I don't wanna be
together.
lost when we get to 8.
by all
I
means,
concur.
I agree with you, so,
Okay,
no, that's
great.
fine. Okay.
Okay.
So recommendation number 1, the current regulation is that appeals of administrative decisions require posted, published, and mailed notice. And so we would like to change Table 3.1 to indicate that no public notice is required. And the reason of this is the process for an appeal of administrative decisions is applicable to decisions made by an administrative official of the city. And so the code states that the only notice of the appeal shall be served upon that official. So the original decision didn't require public notice, so same with this. It's pretty simple.
I don't think we have questions on that one. Pretty straightforward.
Okay.
All right.
The second one has to do with the final plat review criteria. Currently, final plats are reviewed to specified criteria, one of which is that the construction plans for utilities, infrastructure, or other public facilities meet all technical specifications, and you saw that tonight with the CVS plan, or plat. So the applicant seldom develops those construction plans at the time of plat approval, even final plat approval. So we can't really review the final plat to the, construction plans to that criteria, So to approve those final plats, we've had to just add a condition, that those construction plans will meet all technical specifications. So basically, this amendment would just kind of build that condition into the code and require that these plans be found to meet specs, not at the time of final plat approval, but before signing of the plat for recording, just to give them a little more time.
Okay. Questions? Okay.
Oops. Okay, now what? See where it says resume slideshow? I don't know why it's doing that. I do, but, okay. All right. So the current standard for detached accessory buildings over 120 square feet says that they shall be limited to no more than 30% of the required rear yard or 560 square feet, whichever is less. So let me show you this on this next slide, how this works. So we had to interpret first what does the required rear yard mean, and so we interpret that to mean is whatever that required minimum setback is for the rear, we would multiply that times the width of the lot and then take 30% of that area, and that would be the maximum size of that accessory building, or 560 square feet, whichever is less. So that's how it currently works. Going back here, the reason that, the former code had a maximum size for accessory buildings in the R1 and R2 district of 1,000 square feet. But it also said in no instance would it be more than 1/3 of the habitable living area of the residence. So that was kind of hard to figure out sometimes. Anyway, the former code also had an additional provision in a whole different section that said that the detached accessory building could not occupy more than 30% of a rear yard, as opposed to a required rear yard. So the rear yard would be all the way from the rear property line to the building, the back of the building. So there's two different things. There's the required rear yard or the actual rear yard. Sometimes a house is set back more than the minimum required. So anyway, we don't really have an answer exactly yet. We would like to do some case studies of typical lots and structures because we want to see if this new standards are going to create a lot of non-conforming buildings, for one thing. And so potential modifications to the language and their impacts need to be discussed, like whether we allow 30% of the actual rear yard, maybe we say whichever is more. We just want to look into that a little bit further to make sure that it's fair and reasonable. And just keep in mind also that the building coverage standard also influences the size or how much building you can put on the entire property, so.
Okay. Questions from this one?
Okay, the next one is also about, this one is about permitted uses in Table 5.2 and in other sections. So currently there's no listed use to accommodate public utility buildings and infrastructure. We'd like to change those sections to accommodate those public utility buildings and infrastructure. So the reason is our code states that any use that may not be interpreted as relatively equivalent to a use described in this section or use table are not anticipated by these regulations and may only be allowed via a text amendment, so that's what we're trying to do. Currently, our utilities category really only addresses wireless communication antenna and wind systems and solar systems. So the things we might address in an amendment, usually codes will divide them into like minor utilities or major utilities. And examples of minor ones might be electrical and gas distribution substations or lift stations. Major ones might include water and wastewater treatment facilities, major water storage facility, airport, power generation plant, things like that.
Questions? This was an interesting one, 5.04.
Well, what it says
I know.
is that we don't have any specific considerations regarding massage businesses as home occupations, meaning we don't specifically mention them. And what's proposed is adding massage businesses to the list of uses prohibited as home occupations. We do have Title V of the Gardner Municipal Code that has extensive regulations about massage establishments. And it's been suggested to staff that this use would be best handled through those regulations in that process, and that it's not really practical based on the current requirements, those requirements, for this to be a home occupation setting. I will defer any questions to Director Larry Powell on this one. He has more information.
Well, I guess as I read it, and maybe I'm not understanding all of it, but we do have licensing in place, so steps that they have to go through to offer that as a business within Gardner.
Yes, sir.
And through the requirements of that, if they could meet those requirements within their home to operate as a home business, I don't understand why it needs to be excluded. That's the part I couldn't come to, Larry.
Yeah.
And I understand we might be trying to avoid, situations that aren't accommodating, but that's where our licensing gives us enforcement opportunities anyway.
True. The basic standard that I'm trying to apply when I look at this change request is, what is the purpose of a residence? And the major purpose of a residence is to be your home.
Right.
And your home includes your family, which also includes the children. And part of our regulations require that no 18-year-olds or younger be allowed in a massage business. So is it your home or is it a business? And at the same category, I'm allowed to just walk in to the business at any point in time that it's open for inspection purposes as our police officers. And I'm not sure that we wouldn't run into some issues with walking into someone's residence at any time, day or night, to check on their business. Also, do you have children answering the door for a customer? So there are just some real odd quirks to this situation that, to me, are just go away when you don't allow it to be a home occupation, because all those items are taken care of when you have a storefront business for the massage therapy. Because we have to remember, we have to license not only the individual, but the actual location for the massage therapist. So they're going to have out on the public realm, through our city records, their house registered as a business. So you just get all these crossovers of things that, to me, just aren't worth getting into by allowing that particular business to be a home occupation.
How do we differentiate when there's an individual who is, because they bring their table to you, so they actually are massage therapists, but they can do it within your own home?
State regulation at this point in time allows that, but they're registered through chiropractors or medical professions.
Okay.
And that's an allowable use done through a separate licensing agency. It doesn't have anything to do with us licensing them as an establishment, because the establishment is through the medical facility.
Okay.
And then they're an outpatient type service from the medical facility. So you have the massage therapist going to the home to provide the service, not some unknown list of individuals coming to your home for the service. So there is a difference.
Are there other home occupations that we do not allow?
Very few, but there are some, yes, sir. I don't think I have the list in front of me right here.
I think there's like 4.
Yeah, at the present time, there are very few.
Like selling fireworks or something like that kind of stuff?
Well, yes, that's not allowable, because we don't allow any business in a home residential area that has explosive devices or chemicals or things that would be hazardous in nature. And there are some limitations to allowable businesses too. For example, if I'm a paint contractor and I'm running my painting business out of my house, which is allowed, I'm still not allowed to keep 55-gallon drums of oil-based paint in my garage, or 5-gallon buckets of turpentine, or some other explosive or flammable material.
If you're running a home occupation, you still have to comply with the requirements of the underlying residential zoning district. So the different restrictions in that district as to the use and occupancy of that house still have to be complied with. So, for example, outside storage of industrial equipment prohibited in a residential zoning district.
Commissioner Brady, the uses that are prohibited as home occupations in all districts: food and beverage service, retail operations, except for not mail order, vehicle and equipment service and repair, or a machine shop, gymnastics, dance, recording studios and similar uses, and mortuaries.
Which, by the way, doesn't outlaw at-home bands by your children, or lemonade stands by Girl Scouts, or popcorn sales, or anything else.
We went through that whole...
Those are all allowable uses.
Yes.
Thank you, that helps.
Mm-hmm.
I would agree with Larry's comment about blurring the lines between a residence, and particularly on massage therapy or massage establishments. He is correct that our code allows a constant right of access, and that to me seems very inconsistent with, and because we are a public entity, we have to comply with the requirements of the Constitution, and the Constitution and case law under the Constitution dictates a special right of privacy in someone's home, which you don't have in an occupation, or pardon me, in a commercial premises. So it would be, it's difficult to try to marry those two.
Okay.
Good feedback. Okay, if we don't have other questions, we can move on.
Okay.
Thank you.
The next one also pertains to specific accessory uses. Right now, we're just thinking of in-home daycare and also those accessory home occupations. Although the Land Development Code does have specific standards that apply to these uses, it doesn't really state that permits are required for these uses to exist, and it doesn't limit the duration of these uses either. We think it's advisable for these uses to go through a permit approval process so we can make sure all the standards are met before they initiate the use, and maybe even at regular intervals after the use is initiated. So we would like you all to explore an amendment that would clarify permit expectations and durations of the permit for those uses.
Questions on that one?
Yeah, on 504B, it's especially to the in-home daycare. I don't understand why we're permitting beyond what the state ORA requires. Why would it be necessary for us to do that when the state ORA has its own requirements for licensing and they have enforcement mechanisms in place?
Well, we require that they have to get that state license, but we also have additional requirements beyond those, which are related more to the potential nuisance impact within a neighborhood, so.
Right, but those aren't in place. What is it that we need to add?
Well, it just doesn't say anything like, you know, this requires this kind of a permit, or you do apply for a permit. It doesn't even mention that they have to get a permit. And maybe you want to have a term, like the permit's good for a certain number of years, and then they get reevaluated and see if anything's changed, and sort of re-permit them.
Before I would support this one in particular, I'd need to see a better comparison of what the cities close to us are doing, and then also what it is that we're inspecting when we go in there. Because what I fear is a liability standpoint. If we're inspecting and licensing on our own case, and we don't have people that are trained for the appropriate inspection type duties, then what liability are we taking on? By permitting, are we inviting liability in these places when the state's already accepted that sort of umbrella with its own licensing capabilities? I wonder if we're introducing that by taking on that responsibility on our own. So I'd like to see if there's anybody else that's doing that, and it may not be an instance where we want to stand out from the crowd.
Okay, we'll sure be able to look into that. Any other?
Yeah. Good point. Okay.
Okay, we also have a use that's described as outdoor sales heavy. We actually have several uses that are kind of inconsistent in addressing these outdoor sales, just storage, display situations. So basically, we would just like to relook at that and make sure that the various terms and standards are clarified for consistency. If you want more information, I can kind of, we have accessory outdoor display areas and accessory outdoor storage areas that get in a little deeper into specifying the location of those outdoor storage areas, the required clear vision, utility easements and floodplains in relation to that, also the surface materials and screening. But this principal use, which is outdoor sales heavy, really doesn't have much in the way of detailed standards like those. It just talks about lighting. And we thought, well, do you count that as an accessory use? that's associated with this principal use and apply both standards, or it's just not really clear. So we would like to clarify that.
Give an example of this, like, what would be in Gardner right now that would pertain to this?
That would be like the RV, Olathe RV, or a car dealer.
Another example would be the new Orchland store. They had an outside storage area that they wanted to put up for specific types of outdoor equipment, like their trailers and their cattle guards and those kinds of things. And we had to assist them in locating a site that would be both available to the public, but would also be not interfere with any of the visual sightline problems or block certain utilities, et cetera, for fire code, ways to get around the building, et cetera. So that's another area that we'll be looking at.
That helps.
And see, that's where it gets confusing, because Orchland's main business is indoors, but they do have this accessory outdoor storage or display area, whatever you want to call it, but whatever you call it makes a difference in what standards you apply, whereas Olathe RV, pretty much everything's outdoors, and so.
The new or used car lots that was be added here in Gardner someplace, this would fall in place, this would be applicable to that.
And actually, these standards really are only meant to apply where it's permitted as a conditional use, which is like in the C3 district, I think. We don't put specific standards on this use if it's in the industrial district, for instance, but we want to have a little more control in the commercial district, so we just feel it's not doing enough.
Great.
Okay.
Okay. Move on.
Okay, hopefully we'll see some more food and beverage mobile uses. They, however, are another thing that's a little bit confusing in the code, because they're subject to about 3 different sections of regulations. So there's specific standards for them in Section 505P, but they also count as a temporary use, and in the table they're listed as a temporary use. So that means we have to apply the standards for temporary uses, and they're also reviewed through the administrative site plan process, which also has review criteria associated with that. So there's no difficulty with some of those pairings, but the pairing of the temporary use with the specific standards for food and beverage mobile creates some conflicts or questions of what we're supposed to do. So, for instance, the temporary use section has various types of events that you might have that are temporary, and it lists specific durations for those. And, you know, what would you do if you had a mobile vendor who wants to be here 1 day a week, every week for the whole year, you know, and then the permit's $50 for that. And so if you say, okay, 7 times, $50, how many times, you know, is appropriate. So it's different than a one-time use that happens and goes away. This is like a recurring thing that's not really provided for in the temporary uses. So we want to kind of iron that out and see what's reasonable, and see what other communities are doing on that as well.
Yeah, I think it's important that we compare to what the other municipalities are, because we don't want our process to stop them from coming a little further south.
Right.
So we need to compare and make it easy for them to get here.
I'd like to have a bunch of food trucks lined out here. Okay. So we'll be sure and look at other municipalities for some guidance there. Okay, this one is a very important one. Our current standards are not consistent with the recently enacted Kansas Siting Act, so we need to revise them to be consistent with current state regulations. I don't know if you'd like to talk about that at all, Ryan, since you're...
So the Kansas legislature adopted the Kansas Siting Act during the last legislative session. It became effective October 1. The effect of it has been to, well, the purpose of it was really to streamline telecommunications siting throughout the entire state of Kansas, because I think a lot of the telecommunications providers were complaining that jurisdiction by jurisdiction, the requirements for what they were required to submit varied significantly, and so they wanted to hopefully have some uniformity in what they did throughout the state. So that was kind of the overarching goal of this legislation. It does significantly restrict what municipalities can require in terms of applications from telecommunications providers. It also does some things that we have never seen before, in that it allows, for example, location as a matter of right within the public right-of-way of telecommunications siting, and so a lot of municipalities are struggling with that. Several municipalities I represent have gotten applications for location of telecommunications antenna on light poles, and so I was just at a CLE last Friday where we were going over all the requirements of this. It's a big issue that municipalities throughout the state are struggling with, and we're all trying to get our arms around what we can and can't restrict further. But the act is clear that certain parts of planning and zoning authority relative to telecommunications facility is still reserved to municipalities. For example, such as height restrictions within the right-of-way. That's telecommunications companies don't really like the fact that that was left in, but that was one thing. So anyway, every municipality throughout the state is looking at their codes and revising their codes in light of what was done. So.
Okay, that's kind of that one. I think there's questions.
Okay, the next one, our current regulations aren't very clear on what regulations pertain to residential additions, accessory structures, and outdoor storage of materials and equipment in mobile home parks. So we'd like to revise the mobile home park district standards to make sure, or alternately, the other sections to just make sure that we can deal with some of those things in mobile home parks where you don't necessarily have property lines for those regulations to apply to or refer to, and or at least not for the individual, residences. So it's hard to know how to apply something like that. So I'd like to clarify that.
Okay. Questions?
Okay, the next one's also for that same plan district. The designation for this district changed from the former ordinance, and it was actually the only zoning district that we changed the name of. We kept all the names the same even though we are doing different things in them, but this one we changed the name from MP to RMP. So I guess staff's question was, does this create any kind of difficulty for a former zoning map, or is there any negative implications of this that we need to look at? And I don't know if, Ryan, you have any thoughts on that one, but okay.
Do we have any questions? Okay.
Okay, the next one is the issue of the color palette that is currently required to be submitted with all site plan, final development plan, and building permit applications, to the point that we're not supposed to issue that permit until we have received that color palette and it's been approved. So I think you heard from Phil Martins about the practical difficulty in applying this, because we're telling them they had to provide it, and they're like, I have no idea. And so we said, well, submit something, and you can change it later, and that's working. But really the standards of approval are that, here's the things that it controls, that the primary and accent colors of the building elements are part of a coordinated or complementary color scheme, and that the primary facade colors have to be low reflecting, subtle, not intense, bright, or fluorescent. So that's what it's basically dealing with. So we want to give you all the opportunity to look at that, say, the former code, exempted, single-family homes and duplexes from this requirement. We do have a person who can drive around and find a bright pink house and give them a citation and say, this is not allowed. It's a little subjective, like, what if it's a black house? Is that intense, or is that like navy blue or dark brown, or, so it's kind of a difficult issue, but if you do want to keep it, it'd be better if it just said, before they occupy the house, we approve the color palette, so.
Questions or thoughts on this one?
Well, I don't have a question. I just have an opinion, I guess. I think it should be exempt. I don't know. I feel like we shouldn't be totally, I know there's design standards, but I don't know. I'd like it to be exempt. That's just my opinion.
I agree.
Consensus?
I agree.
Like
Do
a,
we even have to agree right now?
no, I guess it was just discussion for the record, but
Okay,
seems there might be consensus.
so we'll pursue those different ways and create some language so you can.
Okay. If you have other questions, then keep moving.
Okay, and this one was also mentioned by Mr. Martins. So the detached house suburban building type, which is the one we've been using the most because our lots were basically set up for that. That's the one building type that was meant to maintain that status quo from the former ordinance. And so usually that's the one that we apply. And it does have a minimum side setback requirement of 9 feet. So we're asking you to consider whether changing it to 7 feet would be beneficial. I don't have a lot to add to what he said. I just did want to show you that table of the other jurisdictions that, there's some differences in the minimum lot area requirements and lot widths associated with those 7-foot side setbacks. But 7 foot is pretty predominant in the area that would be competing with our developers, so.
Consistent, which is good. I don't think we have other questions.
I would just like to mention one
Yeah.
other thing, that the setback in this particular instance does affect another part of our, a different part of our city code. And that is, if you remember, we went through the parking of trailers and mobile homes and, not mobile homes, excuse me, RVs and so forth, boats, allowing them to be parked beside your house. And we shifted that to allow, of course, now to be 2 units, either one on the back or on the side or one in the driveway, because originally only in the driveway was the construction trailer. So that got broadened to be any of the items that you wanted in the driveway. By narrowing the house widths, you basically eliminate the ability in the newer subdivisions where they build the wider houses or to have room to park something beside your house. I just want you to be aware of that.
Or even to get to the backyard in a lot of cases.
That's true. You'd be also eliminating the ability to, because you basically need 8 foot. You need about a foot to clear the house unless you're a really good driver. And most gates are usually in the 7.5 to 8 foot range to get to the backyard if they have that ability to get back there, so.
And the mitigating thing would be if they do put that 3-car garage in and put the stuff in their garage, so.
We would hope.
That could be good.
Other questions, thoughts?
Okay. All right, the current current standard for large commercial building type, the height limit is 40 feet or 3 stories. We would like to consider revising that to accommodate up to 5-story buildings, 60 feet in height. This was basically an oversight. We really don't have a type of development, a building type that would accommodate this kind of thing currently. The only thing that the building types we have that would currently accommodate a 4 or 5-story building, 60 foot tall, is mid-rise apartments, mixed-use, prominent civic, or general industrial building types. But that mixed-use building type really is only allowed on lots up to 30,000 square feet in our office and downtown districts. So that wouldn't allow, something else on the outskirts that would be taller and accommodate a bigger use. So we think that this building type would be the best one to accommodate that kind of a development, and it's allowed in the C3, M1, and M2 districts.
Questions, comments? Okay.
And so while we're looking at those non-residential building heights, we would like to just make them a little more consistent between residential and non-residential. Originally, I think the consultant said he was thinking commercial buildings would have flat roofs. But then as we were talking, he said, well, that may not always be the case, and we do allow the larger story heights on the non-residential buildings than we do in the residential buildings. So we were just thinking of making the heights more consistent across those non-residential and residential districts. We may only change one of them.
Questions, comments?
Okay, frontage design standards. This one is the one about the driveways that Mr. Martins was also talking about. The suburban yard, which is also the frontage type we use most often so far, has an access width limit of 25 feet, and that is 25 feet of the lot width applied. It's supposed to be applied to the entire frontage area, which would be from the front lot line to where the house is located. And then it also has a maximum 24 feet per access point. So just showing you, here's what we did in our former ordinance. And this kind of changed around because it was public works specifications mostly for driveways. The only thing the zoning ordinance had was a minimum driveway size, so we really didn't regulate maximum driveway sizes in our our former zoning ordinance. But you'll see those driveways with the check mark kind of met with the standards we had, right previously to the Land Development Code, which was 22 feet wide in the right-of-way area. Then they could flare it out from there. The ones with the red X's, I'm not sure those were actually ever permitted, but maybe under regulations even further back.
No.
But a lot of times people just sort of add on and they don't get permits, but now they do have to get permits for those driveways, so. But the problem is that when you combine this frontage type with a detached house suburban building type at a minimum lot width of 70 feet, this results in a limit to the driveway width of 17.5 feet, which is supposed to be applied to the entire frontage area. So that is your minimum lot, and if they make the lot bigger, they can have a bigger driveway, but we have a lot of existing 70-foot wide lots that still need to be built on, so it's impacting those. And that creates problems with trying to accommodate, cars parked outside or even two-car garages. We do think that having a maximum limit is very beneficial. We don't want pedestrians having to cross that huge expanse of concrete, when they're on the sidewalk. We want to try to limit impervious surfaces in that frontage area and help with the stormwater runoff situations. But we just would like to consider making it something that's actually practical for, this is our current context. So just to get some kind of a balance there. We'll look at different strategies for doing that, but it might just be changing the percent would take care of it.
Okay. Questions, comments? All right.
Okay, moving right along.
Yeah.
Okay, this one, this is like our second puzzler. We were trying to approve a house, and And we have these allocation of space standards. So in that suburban yard frontage type, again, you know, besides the driveway limit, you also have these limits on the percentage of turf, the percentage of landscape, and percent of hardscape. So when we went to apply that, let's just say we did allow 21-foot driveways, and just, this is an actual case with a typical lot size. That hardscape comes to 30%, and that's just a minimal driveway. And that's with our 70-foot wide lot and the minimum front setback. Well, we only allow hardscapes of 0 to 15%, so there's like no way really for them to meet that standard. So I know what we were trying to achieve. I think we maybe just didn't quite get it there. So we want to look at, do we just get rid of this so we don't, you know, are we covering this whole idea and goal with the regulations that we have in combination, or do we just keep the total limit on the hardscape because everything else is going to be turf or landscape? They don't know what if it's going to be landscaping or turf when they're coming in for their building permit. They don't know how many trees or necessarily shrubs and everything else is going to end up being planted there. But they do, you know, we can limit how big that driveway could grow later, you know, so that's what we'd like to look at there.
I think you might want to look at it as a hardscape maximum that exempts the driveway, because the driveway is going to have different regulations that limit the width of that. So then you look at that 0 to 15%. That prevents somebody from putting a basketball slab in their front yard, but doesn't limit them because we can't meet it when we incorporate the driveway. So if you exempt the driveway from that calculation, then you can get more reasonable with it.
And your reasoning is that we already have a maximum on the driveway.
Right. It's already regulated through what we just looked at, so they can't go past that. But obviously, it's not feasible to have a hardscape limit if you're incorporating driveway because that eats up so much of a 70-foot lot.
And the things people do put extra concrete down for is to park their trailers or their RVs, or they can't technically park those in the front yard area, but sometimes just to get to that, they'll put more in the pavement in the front yard area. So, okay, we can look at that.
I think that's one way to look at it.
Suggestion. Comments? Okay.
Okay, we have a minimum corner separation distance for local roads in residential areas of 75 feet. Basically, this is just an example. If you look at that red line and where it ends, that would be where the driveway would be able to start. That's like a 70-foot long line, approximately. So you can see how many of our 70-foot lots are not able to accommodate that 75-foot corner separation. Obviously, when we have new development, we would anticipate that they would create a bigger lot on the corner that could accommodate that 75-foot separation distance and the width of the driveway and the driveway setback for the property line. But this is a problem for existing lots that people are trying to use. So we talked about this with the consultant, and so he was thinking that if we make that separation distance only applicable to corners of collector and local streets, but not local streets, that would help accommodate those existing lots. We can look at different strategies there as well, if there's anything you can think of.
I think when we look at that, we're going to have to look at what's existing and how many things wouldn't be in compliance, because if 100% of what we already have is outside of this compliance, then to ask somebody that's building new to meet that is kind of an unfair standard. So if we're going to, even if we limit it to materials and such, I mean, I'm just thinking about the ones I drive on, and at 75 feet, I would say it's not matched well more often than it is matched. So we may, I think we may be setting an unfair standard if we try to change it to that, or an undue burden on those new developments to meet a standard that's not in place anywhere else in the city.
Okay. Any other thoughts? Okay. Okay, we're back to signs. Temporary freestanding signs in the residential agriculture and REC districts are allowed in the Land Development Code at 1 square foot per 5 linear feet of street frontage with a 9 square feet sign maximum. So we had a realtor that has some developable land in a residential district who really wanted to put a bigger sign than 9 square feet for this property they had for sale. So we got to thinking, well, you know, what if they did have larger properties? You know, would it make sense that you could have a larger sign, maybe up to potentially 24 square feet maximum if they're over 5-acre lots, or, you know, whatever number seems reasonable to you. We thought that was worth bringing up. Because if you remember, we can't, you know, just pull out the real estate signs and treat them differently. It has to apply to all temporary signs in those districts, so.
I wonder if we shouldn't just limit it to undeveloped land. Because my concern is if we make it 24 square feet, well, if my neighbor's got his house for sale, there's nothing that would stop him from putting a 6x4 sign if his realtor wanted to do that right in his front yard. But
You mean if he has a 5-acre lot?
Well, is it limited to?
Well, I was just thinking if they had.
Well, I mean, we could put a lot size in there, I mean, if we want to do that that way, I guess, if you want to meet it, but I'm just wondering. Because if it's 5-acre lot, then it could be an existing business that's highway access or something else, but if, maybe that's okay.
Well, it's different in the non-residential districts. They can have bigger ones in there. But it would be like if it's a farm, or if it's a subdivision, a future subdivision property.
How many 5-acre lots do we have within the city limits in residential development?
None.
I don't know
we
if
have
we
any?
share it. Does anybody else?
Not
Well,
5 acre.
we have,
Few.
there are a few, but they're generally not on the market very often. I agree with what your thinking, though, is that, we either need to put a size limit based on the fact that it's undeveloped, and therefore we're trying to draw attention to it, for development purposes, and or put a lot limit size, or maybe some of both, depending if it's residential or non-residential in use.
Right.
The fact is we also have areas where we have realtors that are attempting to get people to realize that there is a development going on 5 blocks over this way, and so they have signs, or some on Gardner Road for a developer to the west who put up a very tall, angular sign, which really doesn't quite meet the code, and we've not really done much with it, and we're trying to figure out best ways to look at that. That's not the reason for this. This is more general in nature, but that's an example of the kind of larger sign that you have. And it's on a city already platted lot, so it's not undeveloped to that degree. But it is a sign that's really not for that property. It's for a property somewhere else. So it's just one thing to look at, and size is an issue, but also whose sign is it, and is it on their own property?
Well, we do have I think we have a requirement in the code that it has to be on the property to which it pertains currently. Any other thoughts on that one? The weird thing about this one is, even though it was a big piece of land, it just had a very narrow frontage.
Right.
So sometimes that happens too. Which is why the standard is based on linear feet of frontage. But it's just a pretty low maximum, but not for a residential lot, right? So if you think that's worth looking into, we'll be happy to do that.
Take a look. Yeah. Look at it.
I wonder if there's others that have restrictions that would be by district. So, commercial district obviously would have different than what the residential was, so maybe we just eliminate it from a residential perspective and say, apologize, but, and maybe there could be a conditional use of some sort if they are trying to promote a development and they've got a set number of lots available and there's limits there, but I just wonder if we can look at it by actual zone district instead of what the regulations should be.
Yeah, our regulations are just divided into like basically the non-residential ones.
Right.
And then the other one is residential ag and REC lumped together. And if ideas occur to you later, you know, by all means, send them along.
Right.
We can look into that.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea. Keep moving.
19 recommendations here, and obviously you're gonna be building on these a little bit to get more specific language. Timeline, you said maybe some of these will come back to us in November, maybe some in December.
Right.
For me, I'd like to see them spread out like that, because there's a lot here.
Yeah, okay.
So, I don't know what your all's timeline is, but, I mean, if this goes into February, March, April, I'm okay with that.
Okay, what we could do is, see which ones are the most pressing, the least complicated, you know, try to do the most pressing ones first that are causing the most issues, and then maybe do the least complicated ones next that,
Well,
you know.
trust your judgment on that, but
Yeah,
I'd like to just see them spread out a little bit.
Agree.
okay. I'll be easy on you.
Thank you.
Okay, you ready to go to the next one?
Do the last one.
All right. Okay, so this one is just kind of a strange thing. The way it's written right now, it makes it seem like you can't have banners as temporary wall signs, which is not what we meant to have happen. So this one, we did suggest some language just temporarily here that we would probably change it to make sure that people know, if they're using a non-rigid material like a banner, you can have it on a wall, you can have it on a rigid backing material, or you can completely frame it so it doesn't sag or flap, and then you can use it as a wall or freestanding sign, if you meet, you know, the standards that we have, so.
That makes sense. I think there's questions on that one?
Is this a big issue facing the city of Gardner?
Oh, yes, lots of people want to have banners.
Yeah.
So it has come up quite a few times. Chad's been reviewing these frequently, because I think it's an inexpensive way to communicate for businesses, and so they like to do that.
And the city views it as a visual distraction, how people are driving and it's led to wrecks or something? What's
Yeah.
or just aesthetically, it's not as pleasing? What's the...
Well, we want them 30 foot away from the pavement edge for the site issues. Most of the time, they would put up T-posts and string them to that, and it'd be sagging. You couldn't really read them, you know, and they're just drooping and not being maintained very well. But they don't look good aesthetically. Plus, the ones, you know, all those blade feather signs, we didn't allow before because those were attention-attracting devices. So we're still not allowing those because they don't have a frame all the way around them, and they flap.
I'm just being semi-sarcastic.
It's a very important thing.
Yeah, I think we're good there. Then the appendices.
Yes. Chad's been reviewing a lot of plans. Our code talks about medium trees, but our tree list doesn't mention medium trees anywhere.
We need the list.
So, he wants a list.
Absolutely.
We have a landscape architect that can help with that, I think. So,
I don't think there's questions on the appendices.
No.
There's no other questions or comments. Discussion, I think we had a great presentation by Kelly, and I think all of the text amendments sound worth exploring, but that's just my 2 cents, so I'll let the other commissioners weigh in with the discussion, or we could entertain a motion.
I think we could probably get into deeper discussion in debating the pros cons when they come up specifically in the coming months.
Agreed. Okay. That being the consensus, I would entertain a motion for this item.
I move the Planning Commission support the initiation of text amendments to the Gardner Land Development Code to address issues as summarized in the October 25th, 2015 staff report.
Second. We have a motion made by Limer with a second by Lavella that the Planning Commission will support the initiation of text amendments to the Gardner Land Development Code to address issues as summarized in the October 25th, 2016 staff
Oh,
report.
oops,
I read.
It's all good.
thank you.
All those in favor, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Motion carries with all in favor. Look forward to hearing more about that and, spread out over a couple meetings would be great, because I think there will
Well,
be a lot
thank
of
you for your
discussion.
continued patience in code issues. We appreciate it.
Absolutely. Okay, that being the, last item on the regular agenda, there is one discussion item, being the, Gardner Main Street Corridor Plan, a planning sustainable places project.
Kelly Drake Woodward again, to talk about this exciting project. The good news is, you're not gonna only deal with code issues during this next year. You're gonna have an exciting plan going on that you're gonna be extensively involved with. This plan is actually funded through the Planning Sustainable Places Program in association with the Mid-America Regional Council, so we did get a pretty sizable grant, and it's a pretty large project that basically looks for our corridor area from end to end and, expanding to our neighborhoods, in the middle. We did have the top scoring applications of both states. Should be proud of that. The good thing about this plan and the time at which it comes, it does address a long list of goals and objectives and tasks that are already outlined in our Gardner Comprehensive Plan. So they're already supported, should we move forward with projects. But this will further clarify, that plan specifically for this area, and especially good timing since we just revised our land development regulations. And so now we can start to apply those to this area. Remember when we were doing the land development code, we said, well, we used to have this, district, especially for downtown, but it wasn't really working. We wanted to look at that further before we, had those specific regulations for the downtown, so this is your opportunity to do that. On the next steps, and that would come, the completion of the project is expected to happen by February 2018. We would start in maybe March of 2017. So after that, we would be able to go to the next funding opportunity, which would be for project development or implementation, or at least we hope those funds will be available then. This is basically the area and the different kind of, the green is the core area. We consider the blue to be the gateway areas that we would look at a little bit differently. This can be amended too as the plan goes along, but this is what we submitted to the grant agency as our thought. These are the basic goals that we hope to address. Larry wants us to be economic competitive, right? So we want to utilize some market studies to help determine the feasibility of different future growth scenarios along the corridor. We want to have a cohesive vision that our residents will support, so we want to engage them in an interactive public process. We do want to catalyze growth, and we think we can do this by directly working with some private property owners and helping them make financially informed decisions that are supported by this market analysis. We want to identify appropriate street, open space, building, and frontage types that come out of our land development code for these different areas, or maybe we have to recommend new ones. So we'll see what comes from that. We definitely need to identify transportation infrastructure improvements that will support growth. We do expect, Larry might want to talk about the population study, that we expect some significant growth.
What she's referring to is the city basically completed a new population study which takes into account the growth activity that we're expecting to see based on our current trends and what's occurred over the last 10 years, and we took that out to 2040. If the percentage of growth, which we're averaging now, is between 1.2 to 1.5%. That's expected to continue to increase every year till out to 2040, which could get us basically to 51,000 people. At that number of people, we will certainly expect to have a number of major changes to our community, not only just in the size of the community, but in both its retail operation and the types of things that the population expect to have closer to home rather than traveling for. So the market studies will be important and incremental to us in trying to plan on where those things should be and how they should be developed. That will also help look at future park development, trails development, greenways. We'll also be needing to look at the types of activities that we can incorporate across the city, the existing city, and future growth areas for future economic activities. And we're taking into account several things that we really don't do a lot of right now, but we could expect to see more of. One of those might be sports tourism type activities. That's very big across the United States. It seems to be a continuing growth item. It could be something we certainly could take advantage of. We have a basic set of good parks, but we don't have a lot of sports activities tied to them at the current time. Johnson County supplies a large number of these types of activities. It's pretty easy for us to work with them and piggyback with some of those activities locally. So that would be one thing that we would like to do, in addition to looking at the basic economic growth of just the normal logistics center, warehouse, New Century type activities, and the retail activity that we certainly hope to get more of.
Okay, and so when we're enhancing quality of life and sense of place, that's when we're going to look at some of those things that Larry was just talking about, making that corridor, that center for community. Things like enhanced streetscapes, non-motorized infrastructure, and new climate-sensitive public spaces. And we want to also consider a more coordinated stormwater management infrastructure that could also serve as a recreational amenity, if possible. We think we're going to have increased flash floods and things like that we'll need to think about and have some biological infrastructure for, if possible. So these are some of the just general ideas of the activities that's going to take place. The consultant will do some research in those market studies to help with different scenarios that we could look at and see which ones would be the most beneficial. And we also have a pretty important public charrette, which will be for anybody that's interested to attend. Also, key stakeholders will be invited, and we'll certainly depend on you guys to do some leadership roles in the charrette. So there'll be actual group tours of the area, mapping exercises when they come back, and then try to bring them all to consensus, these different groups, and come up with some kind of a presentation that they can believe in. And we're going to do that targeted property owner outreach to help them make some decisions about what might happen to their properties in the future. Some of the tools we'll use are graphic visualizations. It's hard for people to imagine change sometimes, so that is very helpful. And then we'll basically come up with what it is. It's basically a land use development and infrastructure plan for the heart of Gardner. And this is just kind of a preliminary quick look at some of the properties that could be good for development or redevelopment or some kind of facade improvements or a little bit of infill development. So it's pretty exciting.
Yeah, it is.
That's all I have.
That's great.
Yeah, really
To me, this is one of the biggest things the city would be biting off in recent history. This has got great potential.
Yeah.
I would encourage you to work with the school district too. If we're gonna get to 51,000 by 2040, you're talking about more than doubling the size of our town. You're looking at 3 more middle schools, potentially 4, another high school. We're building on the current high school, which they're already doing, and doubling the number of elementary schools we have. So we're talking, that's a lot of land that I just talked about.
Yeah, this may be able to help them with their strategies too.
Yes.
be exciting for sure. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm gonna be inviting you all.
Absolutely. If we don't have any other discussion items or questions from the commissioners, I would entertain a motion to adjourn this evening.
I move that we adjourn.
Second?
Motion to adjourn made by Lavella with a second by Limer. All those in favor, please indicate by saying aye. All those opposed? Meeting's adjourned.